workspace. And on this lesson today, we're gonna continue where we left off. And so just a quick recap on what we did on the last lesson. So we created a simple shape with a face, and today, the next lesson, they ask us to make a landscape, and that is on tutorial 1.3, drawing complex shapes. And so they say in the previous one and teaches you how to draw more complex shapes, you can either continue with the project you created in tutorial 1.2, or you can open a file provided with your name tutorial 1.2. This file can be found in the tutorials 1 basics subfolder within your custom content folder. The file you're starting this tutorial should look something like the following. And then there's a picture of a mountain. So we're going to create our own, and you can follow along as I do the process and speak over the process as I'm explaining what I did. So to create the mountain, I used the create point selection, and I start creating my shape and in a mountain, and then in between I start editing up the mountain to the shape, the desired shape you want. So you can easily move the points if they're not exactly where you want them to be. You can move them around. And then I went into the edges and made them points so that they can have sharp corners instead of curves. And then I just corrected a bit of everything to make the hill perfect how I want it to be. And then from there I can then add my colors. And here it says, on the tutorial it says you need to make a gradient. But as I explained in the previous animation, that this gradient is really limited in how I would like to use it, and it's very hard, but I'll show you. It's not hard, but it's just like you don't get enough of what you can do. The range is very limited, and as you can see here, you get a linear and a radial. Of course, in some instances it will work, but for me it just isn't good enough. And then maybe when animating, it's perfect when animating a day and night scene where the shadow comes from day to dark, but I still feel creating a gradient using the points is the best way to do it, and this one is not as great. So I then select my points, so I select my points, and then which I want to change into a darker shade of green. And see, you get more control. You can actually control where you want the shade to be and the amount of darkness you want it to be, and it blends. It's not just direct contrast. And then from there I'm just making it look neater or how I want it, and I'm deciding, do I really want it dark or do I want it lighter? And then from there you have your gradient. You can turn off the stroke and it looks like mountains in the distance, like grass. And it's basic. It's the basic way. If you want to then go advanced, you can actually import a mountain drawing. But for the purpose of this tutorial and the lesson that they're teaching us, it's just creating a complex shape, and this would be a complex shape mountain. And then always remember to name your layers. It's very useful, like I mentioned in the first video, that if you have all your layers, many layers, you can always have a name for it, and they'll be easier to locate. And if you're working with someone else and you're just the background artist, and then when someone else gets your file, they can easily locate where everything is, and they can animate through the layers up and down. So it is useful to name your layers. And then another trick to add a gradient is where you group all your layers, and then so you have your land layer, which is the hill, and then I add a shadow layer. and then in that shadow layer I then mask it, and then in another video I'll do the step-by-step process of masking if we get to it in the manual, but for now we're just following the manual. And then from there you can add a shadow, and also it gives you greater control and also allows you to create how you want your shadow to be, where you want it to be, and it also gives like a depth to it, more control, depth, and very artistic, and it looks better. So that's how I usually do my shadows when I do a mountain. I mask the shadow in, and then you can have a nice mountain. And then from there, the tutorial then asks us to create a cloud. And then in the cloud, they use the point selection tool where you select your points, you start plotting your points around in the shape of a cloud, as I'm doing here. And then it's simple drag, click, drag, click, drag, click, drag, click, drag, click, drag, click, drag. And always have the auto weld and auto fill turned on, and auto stroke if you want that, and then it automatically changes into the shape and fills it for you. That's a handy tool to have. And then you can select all those and make them curvy using the curvature tool to create the cloud nice and smooth. You can also go in there correcting at each bezel or point. You can correct them using the curve tool or the point tool, and putting the central for the cloud. If I'm animating using the layer, it will be useful to always put it in the center, and then you can always rotate the cloud if you need to rotate it. And then here I am adding a thicker stroke, and I'm thinning out some edges to give it an artistic feel to it. And then you just experiment, do what feels right to you, and see what works. And then adding on there, I add a stroke, and then I change the color for the stroke to gray, blue, whatever you really want. It could be a rain cloud, you could want grays in there. And then also, if you want to add a texture to it, like we did in the last video, you can add a texture to it, and I pick whichever texture works. You can adjust it as you feel like, and you just experiment. It's trial and error till you find out which one works for you, which one looks good. And according to the video, the manual instructions, we have created our cloud, we have created our landscape, and now they're going to add a soft edge to it. And the soft edge gives a blurry feel, and it's an inbuilt setting that you can pick in the effects. And it also works for the strokes, and also works for the shape. So you can pick whichever one you want, and it works. And then from there, I can name the cloud again. Always name your layers. And then let's have a sky so we can see the effect. Instead of having a white background, let's put in a blue background so we can see the effect of the cloud, how it shows up when we preview it. And then I was looking for an interesting sky scene, so I went with pink and add a gradient, how I use the gradient tool, and we can add a little bit of blue, and then it's actually coming out. Our scene is coming out perfect. And this is already in your second lesson of using MOHO, or your second time using MOHO. You can easily create a scene like this, and the instructions are pretty much there. We've just used exactly the instructions that we need to use. And for me, of course, I am using a bit of my own that I've learned over the years how to work and shortcuts, and I hope you've been able to follow through them. And then this is how our scene would come out, and from there you can just go back in, making adjustments, and how you feel would make it look better. And for me, I think if we add a little white in there, our cloud will show up better. And then that's pretty much it, and we've got our scene for our next animation. If we're gonna use it as a background, we already have a scene. And of course you can always go more complex, add more things to it. And then the next thing we're gonna add is a tree. So we're gonna draw in our tree, and then I am gonna leave you to see the rest of the video. It's pretty much the same thing we did for the clouds, for the sky. We followed through all the way to the tree. It's always the same process, and it's pretty easy. If we just follow the manual, we can create a simple basic scene and be ready to animate. So, alright, remember to subscribe, remember to follow. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'll always answer them. And hope you enjoyed this video and it teaches you something that you may not have known or you already know, but it's part of the process. Keep animating. Thank you.